it's unlike anything else. Being able to see these eyes there, and then all of a sudden the facial features and the rest of the form just kind of take shape and then really kind of solidify before you. It's something that still boggles the mind. I mean, it is amazing to see.
Listeners, salutations, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today on the podcast, we are so excited to welcome back to the show author, practicing occultist, and hermetic magician, Frater Ashen Chassan. Listeners, it is always a treat to have Frater Ashen Chassan appear on the podcast, and I definitely encourage you, if you haven't already, to check out Frater Chassan's previous appearances on the podcast, where we discuss both of his books. His first book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, where he really takes listeners through a step-by-step application and working of the Tritemius system, drawing spirits into crystals, as well as the experiences of Frater Chassan and his Scryer, Ben McStefan, with Gateways Through Light and Shadow, where they take those ceremonial workings even further. In this episode, it's a great one because it's so wide-ranging. Frater Chassan answers your awesome listener questions, and he also shares about his new magical chambers and working with his house spirit, Hiram. He also discusses how unclear messages from spirits, quote-unquote, might be much more clear than we think. He also talks about the significance of astrological timing in talisman or pentacle construction, which I found really interesting and practical, especially for magicians working the traditional Grimoire systems. Frater Chassan also discusses his upcoming Ceremonial Magic workshop and so many more topics. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, I give you Frater Ashen Chassan. Frater Ashen Chassan, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back, Alex. It's great to be back.
How is everything going with your magical chambers, your new working space? Can you just give us like an overall update?
It's been wonderful. I can say that it's definitely been spoiled in that genre and having the kind of ideal working space. It's something I've always wanted. In the last two houses I've had my own magical rooms selectively, so that's been nice. I've never had the proper large space with kind of a really contained magical working room where I could have, everything available to me and, pretty much as much space as I wanted. When I moved into the new house, it came with a very large unfinished basement and pretty much had the go-ahead to make that space mine, which was awesome. I was trying to figure out how to fund it and then build it properly, get it all created, and have a very amazing friend that we share a lot in common, especially in the martial art realm, but he's also a very knowledgeable builder as well. And for whatever reason, he helped to agree to build the entire space with me to my specifications, and he was very patient with me because a lot of its construction, I consulted my house spirit, Hiram. And he had a lot of particular instructions for me about how to build it and some things that I found fascinating because he instructed that I put certain wards or engraved symbols of protections in all of the actual framing of the walls. So the walls are contained if way after when I'm gone or whatever happens, if anybody tears down those walls, they're going to be a little shocked because they're going to find some magical articles within the ceilings and walls of these rooms down here, layered very specifically about, I guess, how spiritual activity and communication is supposed to flow, where I can start contacting more powerful beings, but not having them so much affect the rest of the house and the neighborhood, is kind of how he put it. And it was done in this very interestingly scientific way. So I did it to his specifications and what I was looking for. I got really excited because we decided to make it a hidden room. So it has a concealed door where unless you knew exactly what you were looking for, you wouldn't be able to even find the entrance. So that's something that I got really excited about. And it has an adjoining office working space that, I can do my writing and other things. And so it's a pretty nice, ideal setup. At the time where Ben and I were on the podcast last, though, it still was in its working phase. And I think we just had the walls up. I think it might have been painted, but there weren't any doors or anything. So it was just kind of its empty space, but the portals, the doors leading into were not sealed off yet and everything. So it was kind of an interesting experience when we were in there together, as if something was drawn to us just by the fact of us talking about that stuff and being together again, it seemed like.
A couple moments sent shivers down my spine. I definitely encourage listeners to check that out. Just for listeners who haven't heard that part of the last podcast, Frater, we were talking, you and Ben were making a point, and then something happened where there was a visible and audible presence where both you and Ben kind of just stopped. And I think you asked Ben, or Ben asked you, like, do you see that? Like, it was just surreal.
Yeah, it's definitely not something we were expecting at all, because if I remember, I think something fell off. I had something put on a makeshift table or something, and something fell down, and then both of us, it was one of those overwhelming senses of something very powerful being in the room, and we were both, it just hit us like a ton of bricks. Yeah, I think we totally forgot what we were talking about, and we had these kind of deer in the headlights expressions, which for everything we've been through almost seems kind of ridiculous, but I guess it doesn't matter how often you come in contact with that stuff. I mean, when it's there, it kind of goes throughout your entire body, and your cool factor, your rational thinking kind of takes a back seat as, you become very hyper aware of, something unusual being in proximity to you. And it was there for a bit. I think I talked to Hiram about it afterwards, but during the time, we weren't sure exactly what it was, but it was there for a bit, and then it was gone. And it was like, okay, that's interesting.
I was looking at, I believe, some of the pictures that you posted about your new magical working space, and I was just totally geeking out because I was like, oh, that's where Frater's circle's going to go. And oh, look, he even has a little like space outside the circle, which I know is very valuable space, for the manifestation of a certain spirit, or at least giving them the opportunity to manifest. And it just seemed like the way you designed it really could handle the literal physical requirements, whether that's a 7 or 9 foot circle and a location for the spiritual manifestation outside of the circle. Like, did you have all those things in mind when you were designing it?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted a space where I could do avocations with the full 9 foot circle and have plenty of room on all 4 sides for manifestation of a spirit. So that was kind of a key factor. I have things set up in proximity around where I can immediately do talismanic workings or blessings for different altars, and just access a space for all of my incenses and herbs, concoctions where I can make the mixtures when I need to without having to, go in different rooms and all dig around too much. They're kind of available to me. So yeah, it's just nice having everything kind of in its place and where I can access it rather quickly.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Frater, is on the importance of restoring your house spirit, Hiram. I remember in previous podcasts, you and your family were going through the process of moving, and one of the things that you mentioned on the podcast is like, having that available spirit, having that house spirit, Hiram, there to engage with was something that you definitely noticed once, at least temporarily, Hiram was unavailable in certain ways. So now that you've moved into the new space, you have a new magical working operation space. How did it feel to actually restore, in a certain sense, the space for Hiram as a house spirit?
It was amazing, and to be perfectly honest, looking back, I think I might have touched on this a little bit before, but it was amazingly difficult. I had become extremely spoiled with having access to him and being able to talk to him on a daily basis, and ask him not just about magical topics and spirits and things like that, but also practical and very kind of day-to-day things that he always had wisdom for. You always had something that would be relevant to say, and I got used to that, and my wife did, but particularly for me during the transition, which I think was an important lesson for me. It was really hard, and I got into a funk, and it was definitely not my finer moments. It was a little embarrassing, but I had become very used to having him around being able to speak to him. So when I finally was able to get him back out, and this was before the room was built for a while, because he had to kind of linger in my bedroom closet for a little bit before I got a space finally done in the magical room. It was rather emotional, and it was kind of a wake-up call to not take it for granted, but to appreciate it, but to also put things in perspective of, having this access and using it, I guess, appropriately, but not, I don't think depending is quite the word, but possibly, using his wisdom and the conversations that we have in perspective, so that I was always actively engaging my own will and my own efforts to do what I can and to use what he was telling me, I guess, appropriately or really put it forward in the ways that it should. And that kind of goes into, depth of, if you have this kind of, really wise and pretty direct oracle, do you just ask whatever you want to know so you can, know everything just for the sake of knowing? Or do you, carefully consider questions and also how you engage other people that ask you for help and present the knowledge and information? It's not so clear cut. It's not, like a Google thing. There's wisdom and there's lessons that come with certain responsibilities and certain knowledge that, if gained, it changes your perspective. It changes what you do, how you consider things, and how you live. And I think it's something most people wouldn't really think to understand or put in that context, I guess, until you're there. It's just difficult to explain. It's still something that every day I have to kind of put in different ramifications. But without going too further, the magical workings have been phenomenal because of how I've been able to help other people. When my wife has had questions for some of her really close friends or families, and some of the advice he has given has made life changes for them. We both go on just how amazing is this, that, this can have such an effect, and that, just through talking to him, it can cause these sort of ramifications. And my wife is like, you do understand how amazing, you are and how amazing this is. I was like, well, it's not me. It's Hiram. He's the one that told me everything. She's like, yeah, but that, that you're able to talk to him, that he tells you, is amazing. It truly is. It's something that it's every day and I've become accustomed to, but I think I have to put in perspective to really understand that he is an aspect of life that is extremely invaluable. And I guess always for myself, trying to put that into context and just never take it for granted.
Are there any plans to kind of lay out his kind of full journey and full story in the future, along with, of course, every other insanely busy project you have?
That is in the works. And since I've gotten his space, and it's neat, he's got his own kind of room, this little room, which is awesome. So you go in there and talk to him. But that has been picked back up. It was on pause for a bit since the move and reestablishing. But yeah, I'm glad you asked, because that is back in the works and is fascinating. And just the account of his journey and it's totally amazing. It's fantastical. It kind of blows my mind and, stretches my belief and everything that way. But I've been recording it all down, and something that, hopefully with one of my next projects, when it gets all collaborated and I write it down and kind of hopefully piece it together in a relatable format, I think that's going to be a really exciting book coming out.
Speaking of interest in your journey and things going on with your new working space and Hiram, some of the listener questions we got, Harper Feist, who I know is very accomplished in her own right. Harper Feist is asking, can Frater Chassan share a little bit more on his relationship with his Scryer, your Scryer, Ben McStefan?
It's going well. Ben, I'd definitely love to be doing more, working both of us. It's life when we get busy, and my new house is unfortunately further away, which I think lends some aspect of not being able to get together with him as much. But I saw him earlier this month. There was a Celtic celebration, so a celebration of Imbolc. Got to go over there and see him and a lot of good friends that I've known for years since the formation of the Celtic Druidic group that was formed when we were doing all that. So had a blast, talking and sharing again. And I'm sure we'll do several workings again. It's just, a timing thing and being able to match up our schedules. But yeah, it's a friendship and I think a connection that is just so unique and that I'll always be grateful for. And regardless of the aspects of the books and even our magical workings, just who he is, he's definitely one of the most genuine people I think I'll ever know. Talking to him is just always a pleasure because you always know that you're getting him, and whatever that he's saying is coming authentically for how he feels and what he thinks about something. And that alone, I think, is just a tremendous gift. And I always enjoyed being in his company. Yeah, my wife and I love hanging around him and his family and his own mystical journeys and interactions with spirits and such is always phenomenal. So I love to hear about his own work. Even when we're not working together, it's kind of neat how we're both very active in our magical and spiritual paths, even though we're not doing things together or of the same type, which I appreciate. It's really neat to get his perspective on things. So yeah, it's ongoing through then, and hopefully we'll have more workings and adventures in the future.
We have a question also from Henrique Montiero, who is asking, both John King and Stephen Skinner have admitted to not being good scryers and not being able to see spirits in the crystal, although they have been successful at seeing them inside the triangle of art. Why would that be? And of course, I know, Frater, you can't speak for John or Dr. Skinner. However, have you noticed a difference in being able to see spirits in the crystal versus, say, inside the triangle outside of the circle? Is there anything you can share with us there?
I think it's an interesting phenomenon. It really is. And for myself, I have to say that I'm really lucky that I've had multiple genuine experiences on all of those levels. But there is a difference between them for sure. The appearance of the spirit, especially when you're doing an operation, say like from the Lemegatons Goetia or from the Heptameron or something, and things start appearing dynamically in air. To be honest, I think even when scrying within the crystal, when something's genuine, whether that crystal is inside of a magical circle or outside, when a notable, powerful spirit or angel appears, you're going to get phenomenon or effects outside of the crystal, outside of the scrying apparatus. It never is just there, not in my experience. There's always something. It's either an increase of light, the air and the temperature makes very noticeable changes. There should be something going on, so it's not just like a TV screen. The spirit's presence is there, and I think it just chooses to, however it does, focus its imagery, or the scryer and magician are able to kind of assist in the appearance and communication through the scrying apparatus as if it was focused there. But the spirit is there. Its being is very much perceptible within the immediate environment where you're doing the operation. When things appear in the air outside of that, it's an amazing phenomenon. And I can speak about one of the last operations that I did for a client. I hadn't done a goetic working in a while. This last one was just amazing for me because I had honestly kind of felt a little out of practice with doing the traditional goetic operation. But I did it. A client needed me to do it for a reason, and it began actually within the dream state. And I think I spoke about this previously just a bit, so I'll just cover it briefly. But what happened was I was just going through the entire process in my mind before going to sleep. And I do have a good imagination, so I was able to visualize myself showering and putting on the robes and saying the prayers and anointing myself with oil and doing the whole bit. But the funny thing was that during the invocations, doing the call to the spirit, I'm pretty much sure I fell asleep, and I fell into a very deep sleep, and the spirit appeared in very dynamic form, and we had a very long conversation. I remembered exactly how it looked, and when I woke up, I was elated, and it was just amazing because I don't think I've had that particular experience to that degree before, where it was like a whole evocation in the dream state. And it was very, very pleasant. And even in the dream state, I said, well, I experienced all this. I guess I don't need to do the evocation now. I mean, I just did it all here. And the spirit was like, wrong. You do. And the spirit had to deal with time. And it made sense in my dream, but it was really weird. And the spirit was talking about the dream just being a fulfilling of the present because it existed in the future. But when I wake up, you will have to do that to make sure that the future matches up with the present. And it spoke in some sort of very confusing way now, but it made sense in my dream. But I followed its advice, and I did the evocation when I was consciously awake, which was a fantastic thing because I was confident, but I had never been so confident of like, I'd done this before. I've made contact with the spirit already. Seeing it materialize before you as I was doing this call. And yeah, I guess I'm still scrying because I'm looking in a space and expecting it to appear there. And I do get in a state where just my intention is the spirit showing up and I need to engage with it. So exactly how that altered state goes and what all occurs, it's still kind of a building mystery, but it is amazing because it's unlike anything else. Being able to see these eyes there, and then all of a sudden the facial features and the rest of the form just kind of, take shape and then really kind of solidify before you. It's something that still boggles the mind. I mean, it is amazing to see. That was outside the scrying apparatus. It was in the air, and there is a dimension of it being a lot more powerful or a lot more energy needing to take place in order to make that happen. So there's a noticeable difference. It's pretty insane to see, basically, even after doing it a number of times. But when scrying, like I said before, there's still things going on. The spirit is still present. Yes, you're seeing them in the crystal, but they're like in the room. I mean, you can feel them, or I can feel them, and my scryer definitely can throughout the whole room. And then even when we were done, for like some of the powerful archangels, I mean, they filled up the whole house for like a week. It's not so cut and dry as they're not there, and they're in the crystal but not out there. I guess their concept of space and time and everything, as far as we can perceive, is much more complex. The scrying apparatus is something to, I think, focus in clear communication for a scryer. It helps them engage in a controlled manner that's, I think, easier to perceive. But if somebody's not a good scryer, if they're having trouble perceiving in that way, it might just be a developed way of how looking at something in a particular way. It might be like the 3D pictures or just being able to train your eyes optically to look at something, but then look through or past to be able to perceive ocularly in a different method. So that may not mean that, they're not able to perceive spirits at all. It just means that particular technique might be difficult for them, for their brain to kind of really translate how that's supposed to happen, if that makes sense.
Something that you touched on in the previous podcast with Ben is having a scryer really helps in terms of the magician-scryer relationship, really helps because it takes off some of that 100% responsibility of being worried about, okay, I'm saying the invocations, now I'm saying the evocations, now I have to scry into this thing while I do that and wait, now I have to pause and check to see if there's any kind of sign. And I know that both John King and Dr. Skinner have had, a lot of success that they've shared about seeing spirits, but they've mentioned, I know Dr. Skinner has mentioned about using a scryer kind of takes off some of that. It allows the magician to really focus on the invocation. Did you notice that, Frater, in terms of your individual workings, like the goetic operation you just described versus working with Ben? Does it kind of free you up a little bit more, or is it just different in a goetic operation versus like a drawing spirits into crystals operation?
It really is. And if there's one credit I have to give to John, that at least from his records and everything that I've read, he seems to be much better at keeping just his rational mind and comprehension and everything moving pretty steadily through the thing, where, especially when I'm working, and especially if I'm scrying and operating, I did one recently, even with practice, I had trouble regaining my senses enough to go back to the client's questions. I was getting so much drawn into the experience, and it might be through the room, or I'm not sure what, but the experience was more intense even than before, or maybe it's just a frequency thing. I'm not sure, but when the angel appeared, I mean, I was getting drawn in and just lost. And there was this point in my mind, like, I don't want to go to the questions and everything. I just want to get lost in this experience because it was flooding my senses, and everything was looking and feeling amazing. And it was extremely difficult to hold on to concept of where I was or what I was doing. I mean, the concept of even being in a room, being in a magical circle, or even doing a magical operation was rapidly fading, and I was kind of getting lost and again in the experience. It was just extremely difficult, and there's even almost a frustration point in my mind that no, I don't want to have to draw my senses back to, look back and ask the questions so that I'm getting the questions perceivable. And, that's the point where, especially when you memorize the invocations and such, you want to do that, especially when you're trying to make initial contact with an angel, because that can be very disruptive. But even when you do have those memorized and you're there for a practical purpose, you're asking questions, you need to get things done. If you're scrying and operating, it's so difficult to switch frames of mind. And I don't know how the people did it back in the day without a scryer, trying to use quill and write down answers at the same time, because even with practice, it's just not easy to do. And I just record my own voice speaking back the replies from the spirits and these things so that I can write them down later. And I don't think I could write it down and to keep things going like before. Having a scryer there and that operation, I think it was something that it started out as like, well, they did it this way, so let me experiment with it. But I was all, Mr. Gung-Ho solo. But now after experience, it is so much easier, because if you are a scryer, you don't have to worry about that. You just dissolve yourself into the experience and you're completely enraptured in whatever questions asked. You're engaged in the experience and you just repeat back what's going on, and that's all you're concerned about. And it is a lot of trust. You have to place the trust in the operator to keep things going and that sort of thing. And if you're the operator, you just have to trust that, your scryer is communicating back what they see, and it's pretty easy to tell if they are or they're not, or if they're trying to make things up. And I think it's much more conducive to getting accurate and solid information and also getting a successful operation going, because, both parts of that working or being met as best that they may. It's really hard to do both.
I think you phrased it best, Frater, when you said that. I believe it was with an angelic engagement you had, where you got the overwhelming sense that when they make contact or you make contact, what they display is only a very small percentage of their actual power, I guess one could say. Would that be somewhat fair?
Yeah, most definitely. If there's one thing that my scryer, Ben and I agreed with, and we mentioned over and over again, is we would have these incredible experiences, and they would be impacting us for weeks later and flooding our thoughts. And, when we would do the operations in the room, the whole place was filled with what we could perceive of what they were, of who they were. It wasn't just how we saw them in the crystal or just what was heard or what was communicated with us. Yeah, their whole being, whatever that entails. And I think depending on people's perception faculties and, how they're gifted that way, it's going to be amped up with exposure and experience. And I think there's some unlocking that occurs if you get in contact with the proper spirits and angels. You get the go-ahead. Basically, you're going to be able to even experience even more dynamic beings and more experience. But it's still just a fraction. It's still communicated, and it's kind of branching off into another topic, but I hear it discussed on the Solomonic list and other things where people kind of get confused that these angels, like, they're locked into a religious structure, they're locked into a certain kind of mindset of medieval or even contemporary perceptions of who and what they are. And interacting with them, if you have a clear enough mind, they can represent those things, and the communication that come across is, they're relative in those terms, but that's not all encompassing of who they are or even what they are. They're definitely beyond that. And, I think it becomes very clear that you're communicating with them, yes, but an aspect only to which you can comprehend and perceive and also interact with in a way that you can get things done. And that's, the idea of magic. You're contacting them through their office, through their time and everything, because you need to connect in a specific way. That doesn't mean that Archangel Michael, that, he's limited to our understandings of what entails the correspondence to the sun, or this kind of thing. It's just the basic language and particular line of exchange that we can reach them at that point and use it to the best as we can as magicians, but they're definitely not defined or limited, by our perceptions or by our magical texts and understandings that way at all.
Definitely. And what you just touched on, Frater, touches beautifully on another question that Enrique Monteiro had, which kind of touches on a topic of communication and how someone may perceive an angel or a spirit saying something or advising something that sounds vague, but it actually might not be so vague. And so Enrique Monteiro's question is, I have a hard time integrating the lessons received from angels in the crystal. They tend to present things in a very idealistic manner. It's like they're coming from a very rarefied, dreamy, ideal place where everything is close to perfect. So in my view, putting their teachings into practice is very hard for me. Does this ring true with Frater Ashen Chassan's experience? If so, what would be the solution for this? Anything to share on that one, Frater?
Oh, yeah. And I love this topic. It might be the Pisces in me or whatever, but hailing back to your previous podcast as well, too, dealing with the scholar, the excellent lady that talked about the monk, that was using the notary arts and had this, dream. And I think it was, with the Mother Mary or something, but he had this, dream that, he was in a library or something, but said that what he was looking for wasn't there. If I'm recalling it correctly, it's been a few days since I listened to it, but I laughed in spite of myself because a lot of this mystery and a lot of this frustration, I think, is not on the end of the spirits or the angels, but is really the enjoyment of the psychology and the perceptions of the human being. And it's just funny because as a race, we are horrible beings at actually seeing things as they are. We're not, even in the legal realm, people are not very good at witnesses and seeing things in factual sense or even, integrating. We have all these filters, and it's amazing that these spirits have kind of learned to communicate as they have with us, as they engage with us, because it deals so much with our ability to perceive and understand information in a variety of ways. I mean, it's a whole psychology lecture, honestly, in regards to Enrique's question. It comes with our expectations, of what we're expecting to receive as far as information, and even on a practical sense. I think all of us, we go to these magical endeavors and seek out these spirits with expectations of getting something useful that we can apply in a very practical way, which is not unreasonable. What is unreasonable is expecting that communication and that exchange to happen in ways that we are familiar with, like other people. Those mistakes are made. All you have to do is take some anthropology courses, read the case studies of people going into isolated tribes and everything, and the challenges of communication of things that we take for granted, that we just think, well, everybody knows this or everybody responds this way, which is just case in point not true. There's no universal thing like for all people are this way, and then they can all understand, and it's a beautiful array of diverse experiential understandings of even reality. And speaking with incorporeal non-human spirit beings is probably the best case in point. But for me, I love it, and my continued conversations with Hiram and the way that he explains that as well too. It's the same thing. It's that information and exchange with spirits, especially when you're dealing with angels, but even with these goetic beings and a lot of the quote unquote chthonic beings, it's the same thing. The information sometimes it can be pretty direct, but sometimes the lessons are much deeper than this just exchange of data or yes or no or this kind of thing, because that's not the reality of one, the question, and two, the answer. It doesn't work that way when you're looking from a broader perspective. The illusion, the frustration would be on our end, expecting that it should or that it would be that way, and therein lies the problem. So if you're engaged in magic and you're going to be dealing with spirits, just to refer back to this monk, and that's just one case study that was recorded, but it's, you see that it happens time and time again, even from ancient times. Our communications with the gods and the spirits and angels and these kind of things, we're using our filters and our lens to interpret these experiences that we've had. Sometimes we can, if we have enough intellect, hopefully we can use that knowledge and put it towards good ends. But sometimes as human beings, we get off on a tangent and we think it means what we think it means. And we'll either start a religion because of it, because we had this profound experience. And, you can take an academic look at like the Gospels and other things. It's happened all the time. But we have to understand it's through the filter and lenses of our perceptions. And we just have to admit that those are very limited. And to be careful about how we utilize that information, not being so standoffish and stagnant that we don't allow to be changed by it, but also not getting too wrapped up that we get flooded with this ideal from what we take away from it as determining to, I don't know, like the end of the world or, something like that. Where we're kind of going off in this crazy direction, because spirits can definitely lead us on a very cosmic wild goose chase if we're not careful. And I think that's the role of magician, is trying to take this middle path of decoding this information and putting it to its best and most practical use as we can, and really understanding that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be clear and perfect data that way. There is interpretation. There is ways that we're going to try to utilize this information through our imperfections of understanding.
To that point, Frater, Chris Roberts has a question, which he's asking if you can comment on the effectiveness of your self-development via Solomonic magic, i.e., gaining more wholeness of character via angelic invocations and increasing harmonious aspects within one's natal chart. So Chris is asking if you can kind of comment on self-development, but let me throw this in too, because I know Dr. Skinner on a previous podcast mentioned that people come up to him all the time and say, well, how can I use magic to increase my spirituality? And he says, if you want to increase your spirituality, do yoga or do meditation. So I think there might be some people out there wondering, like, can you use these rituals, to elevate that, or is it just, like those benefits are tangential to the magical process? Can you just kind of share your thoughts on all that?
Oh, for sure. So let me put it this way. Before I've had the experiences I've had, I imagine myself that if I was ever actually able to see an angel and communicate with one and have these evocations that I always wanted, there's a large part of, I think, my mind or ego that imagine myself ascending beyond the mundane world and sitting on a cloud somewhere and having, the rest of the worldly concerns and desires and everything being just kind of sliding away from me like water, off of a duck's back or, something like this. And it's, it's funny because I didn't really put it in that context, but I kind of was like, yeah, I mean, if I actually came in contact with something, this real, then, I'd change my world around so much that I would become this type of person. Sitting here now saying that I am more humbled before because I'm still such a silly person that I was even before all these amazing experiences. I value them, and they have changed my life. They have definitely changed some perspective and the way that I do things and I consider things. But if anything, it's just pointed out a lot of my ridiculous sides even more, because I've been gifted with these incredible experiences and exchanges and things that blow my mind every day, but still in the world and still do dumb arguments with people that I know better, or behaviors that I definitely know better than, to do that. And I'd love to say that I'm a much more holy person or actualized or, this high totem person in the great work or anything, but I'm not. I'm really not. It's ongoing. And I agree with Dr. Skinner that, perfecting yourself, if you're expecting the spirits and the angels to do it for you, then you're really in a tough space. And I get constant counseling and things all the time, and I still do stupid stuff, but I take that on myself. It's like my shortcoming is definitely nobody else's fault. But yeah, I mean, yoga and doing other disciplines, yourself, where you're mastering that, I don't know, the microcosm or anything. But yeah, magic is for, these practical ends, and you can have these incredible experiences. It's not I don't think it's going to make you a great person. Hopefully it helps improve upon that. And magic goes in tandem with perfecting yourself and becoming a better person and helping people. But I think there's been plenty of very talented wizards throughout history that were, case in point, horrible human beings. They took advantage and they got some power and they did some bad stuff with it. It ended up destroying their lives, or they just became bad people. I mean, I think that we've seen some cases of that. So hopefully that answers that it's amazing stuff. But yeah, ascending yourself and working with those, there's practices for that. But I'm in agreement with Dr. Skinner. I mean, magic is something that can be used in tandem if done correctly, but it's not the vehicle that's going to make you a better person in and of itself. No demon and no angel is going to do that for you, and to put that on something else would be ridiculous.
To that point, Frater, what does help on an individual level that you've touched on in the past is this concept of will. And we do have a question that follows that from Annalise Antoinette, who is asking, quote, regarding preparation for his ceremonial magic workshop in June, Frater Chassan has said, be ready to use your will and do some intense magical work. He has shared stories from early in his magical journey involving the critical crucible of nature in developing and fully realizing his power of will, including his own Douglas Monroe-based Wild Heint night run, his vision quests in the mountains, and his intense wilderness operation to meet his HGA. It's very clear that nature will expose weakness and temper one's will. Now that Frater Chassan has spent decades tempering, hardening, and strengthening his own will, does he still incorporate nature in the same dynamically challenging way, or is that most critical at the beginning of one's journey? So there's a question there about nature, but also, Frater, does Frater Chassan consider willpower to be similar to a muscle that must be regularly exercised? And if so, how does he personally maintain operation-ready levels of his willpower fitness? Are there specific willpower practices he highly recommends? And what would those recommendations change throughout a magician's practice, and as a magician undergoes what he's called spiritual refinement? And what are things that we can avoid doing that may be weakening our willpower, perhaps without even realizing it? So we got two kind of overall questions, Frater, about willpower and then the place of nature and incorporating nature. And
excellent. I love the question, by the way. And these questions are excellent because they are following a line of thought. I think that they're kind of touching on similar points. I guess something to consider is you think about the masters of meditation and spirituality, which are definitely not me. But, when I've gotten the chance to speak to some of the Tibetan monks and such that have come here, and they've translated that, through meditation, a lot of them, even early on, they reach a level of almost nirvana or satoriya, definitely the state of enlightenment. Well, why do they keep meditating? Well, because as long as you're alive, you can't stay there. Things are in flux. Life continues to move. Perfect balance results in perfect stagnation. You don't get to really stay there unless you find some way to ascend it and move on from the story of life that we're playing at. So the same case in point here that, yeah, definitely nature, returning to nature is still my biggest recharge and reality check, and I definitely need it. When I get too much in my head, maybe I've been arguing and reading too many things and the magical posts and, speaking with people, which is great, but sometimes you got to come to those points where you let go of all the mental jargon and thinking about reality and making up stories about reality, and why not put yourself in reality without distractions? That's my premise. So, I still go out to nature. I do my long backpacking trips, and I like to go by myself when I can. So I'm kind of hardcore that way, but I'm kind of a nature guy, and nature for me is really refining, and there's a lot of will because it's not ideally blissful. It's getting out of the imagination. I mean, it's beautiful out there, but sometimes the weather's rough. Sometimes there's dangerous animals. Sometimes it's really cold. There's slippery things, and you can't rely on people. So, there's a very aspect of danger and having to pay attention, but takes you out of your head and puts you into the cycle of moving life that works exactly according to its design, regardless of what you think about it and, what scholars and scientists and magicians and people, have written about it. Instead of, making it an academic thing, you're in it. You're spending time there. And for me, that's a very important thing, to really be out there and connect with those raw energies and elements. And it's just always been a place for me personally where I feel like I'm getting back to the real basic foundations and truths of pretty much everything, from my body to my mind to my feelings. So yeah, I'll go back out there. I haven't done a wild hunt in many, many years. Yeah, I may do another one. It'd be a good refresher for me before, but just being out there days and nights and spending some time is definitely something that can help reset and I think strengthen my will and my resolve, because I hike out very far and I carry all kinds of stuff with me and just the food that I need and that sort of thing. And yeah, all of those things I think help to retemper the mind and the body, and get at that point, something I want to touch on is getting out of our habits. And at least ask about, what breaks down our will, what causes us to not have that strength and fortitude. And I would say comfort, predictability, and repetitiveness are going to slay all kinds of things that way, and definitely not good for your magic. You need to expand those comfort zones, do something different, especially something that makes you nervous or that you're not comfortable with, or that, gets you a little bit anxious and such. Powerful people will go towards weakness. It's kind of our people that they're only magical gurus and high priestesses and wizards and this kind of thing, in the comfort of their own backyard or, their covens or whatever. And that's all they do. But if you can go beyond your comfort zones and your boundaries and put yourself into novel situations and be exposed to that and, push those areas and be aware, be alive, and kind of look at yourself instead of the story that we create ourselves day to day when we're in a place of familiarity and comfort, that's going to give you truth. The other stuff's going to give you lies, because that's the way our minds work. And it's pretty much case in point. So nature or some kind of aspect where you can expose yourself to different environments and situations so that you can get a new idea of what's really going on with yourself and the world around you.
Here's a question from Carl Bell, who's asking, I'd like to know what challenges Frater Ashen Chassan has faced when going public with his work and how he deals with those challenges. That is in regards to discrimination or challenging behavior from people in modern culture and society who are dismissive of the occult arts and practice thereof. And anything to comment on that, Frater Chassan, in terms of, have you experienced any of those challenges, or does even what other people think to that degree, matter that much?
And that's part of what this is, and you could say it for anything, is, initially I had a lot of apprehension about any of my magical practices being public and, how it would be received by anyone long before I even started writing books or anything like that. And I have to say that overall I'm very happy about not only the response, but the connections that I've made and what I've learned personally from other excellent magicians and scholars and such, as improve my work undoubtedly, 100-fold, where I don't think I'd be near to where I am now without the exchanges and the conversations and sometimes debates and such that I've had with them. So it's been, I'd have to say, overall positive. I think any kind of challenges or troubles that arrived, a lot of times when my own ego would get going about a particular topic, and it would stem from, having an experience like the Almadel, for instance. I had this very intimate experience with those angels. I mean, they were life-changing. It touched me on a very emotional level. It wasn't just a sterile, magical, scientific procedure. It was something that was very near and dear to my heart. It still is. And, if I came across with, somebody, they do this, or it's not enough, or it doesn't work this way, I'd immediately feel myself becoming defensive and angry, because it felt like something that was personal to me, very personal and emotional, was being attacked. And again, that was just kind of an ego emotional response that way. So it was on my end. there's no real trouble if I'm looking at it intelligently or objectively. But yeah, I've had discussions with that, whether it be for the Goetia or other magical things that I've done and I've had success with, and that has become a very pertinent part of myself and my working and my connection to these spirits. I've had to allow the opinions and a lot of other people that all the time, it's so big now, they come on and new gurus all the time, and me and my fellow colleagues and everything. Aaron Leach is a lot better than I am about handling that stuff, and luckily we have other people in the corner that help moderate posts and other, because we have people coming in all the time like, no, this is all crap and this is how you do this. We're sitting here many years after doing this stuff for a long time, like, okay, here we go again, here's a new profound guru. But it's part of the community. It's a new thing for us. I mean, we've been doing it for a while, but the community's exploded really considerably, and new people, younger generations are coming into it all the time, and they get excited just like we were, and they want to jump on there and kind of declare of whatever their conception of what's going on is, and declare it to as many people as possible. It's just human things. So yeah, you're gonna bump up against those kind of challenges, and I think the thing that I still see in the magical community is that division of experience and apprehension of what's going on. And for the new magician, it's just confusing, because when you go on there and you're like, I'm interested, I'm fascinated, and I want to learn how to do this. So who do I ask? And now it really is a maelstrom of information, and it's really frustrating to pin things down because there's so many conflicting opinions and ideals and everything. And I was there myself at one point. It was like, man, I don't know how to do this. And, until I got to the point where I was doing things and getting solid results all the time. And, now it's not an issue. I know what works. I continue, to do what works, but, I'll share, and sometimes I'll get into a debate, but I'm not interested in pressing a point. It's not a religion. It's not something that anybody else needs to practice or needs to even appreciate, because it's my work, and the technology I've got, going for me is what it is. And then there's no, further debate or wondering on that end for me personally. But I know a lot of people are still in the mix, and they're really on the bench because they're not sure. And everybody, we arrive at that point when we do this, and it's just being able to move past it.
Isn't that the ultimate paradox that I think we hear all the time, but we always need to be reminded, which is, it's great to learn from books. It's great to have discussions. It's great to learn from people who have done it. But one of the important things, and I know you've touched on this before, Frater, is that you can read all the books you want, but it's only when you make contact with the specific spirit that you find out what works and what does not, according to the specifications of that specific spirit or that specific entity. Like one thinks of the Book of Abramelin, right? Book 4 of that is all of the magical squares, but I believe it says, the author, says all this is meaningless because your HGA will teach you what you need to know. So can you just kind of comment? And I think that goes to your point, Frater, about like getting into debates and pushing points. It can definitely be effective in some contexts, but in the end, if people are really curious about this, it's all about making that contact themselves.
It really is, and that's the reality, I think, versus the fantasy of magic, or even the intellectual scholarly debate of magic, because it becomes highly hypothesized based on data alone. And perfect case in point is like the Lemegeton and the Goetia and everything. I mean, how much we've learned on that, but you still see it all the time that, this came from this and this was altered that way. And it's not, the Goetia doesn't work. And it's funny because I have to sit over here. I'm like, that's funny. I'm going to have to conjure that spirit back up and going, you liar, you manifest. What did you manifest? You shouldn't have manifested it. All this is wrong. And it's a funny place to be in because, done the operation and doing it, and there you go. And I've had results, and they continue to do. And it's not like the scholarly stuff is, it's there and it points to earlier sources, and I love all this. I do, because it gives us better academic knowledge and a better understanding of where the stuff originates, and it keeps us from getting into Puritan concepts of any kind, it doesn't matter what you're reading from the Bible, from definitely any kind of manuscript on magic and everything. Nothing's in a vacuum. Nothing comes from nothing. I think that's good that, we keep our head on our shoulders and look, this came from other sources. And if anything, and it goes back to my earlier point, we're dealing with people. We're dealing with people and spirits and in those filters, and the technology is sound, but it does change and it does get these different appreciation. I mean, things are going to work a specific way, like Dr. Skinner says. There's across cultures and religions and languages, these certain techniques, this technology is going to work because it's been utilized and it's proven to be effective over and over again. But the particulars and a lot of the stylistic ideas and this kind of thing of course, it's going to be changed by people. It's going to be modified this way and that way. That's something I've always appreciated. And I think people, they're like, wait, but you're the purity guy doing it this way. And they might be misunderstanding me. It's like, no, I know this comes from other things. But if you want to tackle an experiment in magic, you can appreciate that stuff, but if you're just trying to decode it down to some pure source or break it all apart, you're never going to get anywhere. I don't care if it's the Goetia of right now, if that is your book, do that. Don't concern yourself with, everything else, because you're just going to spread out. You're never going to get anywhere. Choose a formula and a working and do that. And then you can do your mental masturbation and scholarly work and do that elsewhere, but not in your magic. It's not going to help you. You're just going to be lost in your head that way.
Every single grimoire on the planet, it comes from or is a result of multiple tributaries of other historical influences. I mean, look at the Heptameron, for example. On the surface, it looks like just it's a Catholic grimoire based, it's all in ecclesiastical Latin. But wait, the name Heptameron and the Greek names, and there's a Greek influence. But wait, the actual seven heavens that are delineated in the Heptameron come from or are heavily based on the Sefer HaRazim, which is from 200 AD. But wait, the aerial kings in the Heptameron are the very, very close to the Islamic Arabic jinn kings like Maimon and Varkhan Rex, so it's even considered one of the more pure grimoires, quote unquote, in the Western tradition, comes from 4 or 5 different sources. So I think that goes exactly to what you're saying, Frater. I mean, drawing spirits into crystals, which probably better than anyone, has roots with the Heptameron and the Key of Solomon and, Trithemius's works. I mean, yeah, it just seems like everything flows into and out of one another.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of one of the biggest things. And honestly, I think where people get tripped up is they're really trying to find some pure source, or they're trying to kind of do the New Age approach and take well, this came from all these traditions, so I'm going to take from all these traditions. And I think that's also kind of an idealistic approach that's going to make people continually spinning around, because yes, they draw from all these positions, but if you're going to go from its Arabic influence, then do that, but really stick with that paradigm as best you may. Yes, even the Arabic is going to have influences from other cultures and things, but there really has to be kind of a tradition and a foundation and process for people to work with, because those rational idealisms don't work, I find, in magic. You really have to come from a conceptualized, I dare say, philosophy, if not tradition and outlook, a spiritual framework that's consistent with what you are doing. And that doesn't mean that the grimoire doesn't have borrowed elements from this and that tradition and earlier religions and this. That argument doesn't work well for actual practice. You have to approach it with a certain conduit of communication that's been established. So if you're doing Heptameron, you're doing the Catholic thing, that's what it is. Just because those things were borrowed from other things, trying to do Heptameron from, a purely Egyptian standpoint or for this and that, you're getting too many conflicting elements that, one, you're not a master of and you haven't been born into. 2, you don't have a full framework about how that works. And anybody that tries to claim that is really fooling themselves. So I think that therein lies a lot of the conundrum of how people try to appreciate, how to do these types of magical workings.
Doesn't that get to the heart of something John King mentioned when he was on the podcast, which is take the heptameron or the Goetia of the Lemegeton, is exactly like the reason why you have to follow what it says in the book. Again, it's not getting bogged down in grimoire purism, but the reason why you follow it is because you are fulfilling the terms of the previously established traces of occult and esoteric efficacy. Like the heptameron has a specific signature to it, and the spirits associated with it will respond if you fulfill the terms. How do you fulfill the terms? It's by, like you say, going through the rite or with drawing spirits into crystals. The reason why using a black ebony wand and, tracing it upon the ground, someone may come in and go, well, actually, in a Norse context, you should tap it on the ground. No, it's like, no, the reason why you're, of course you can do it different ways, but the reason why you're fulfilling that is because you are fulfilling the mutually agreed upon terms that are part of the grimoire and part of the relationship between the spirit and the magician.
Yeah, exactly. And perfectly put. Again, it boils back down to the earlier conversation of just trying the people coming at this and thinking they understand and appreciate the elements for what they are and making assumptions about how this works and what certain things are for without having the experience first, without doing it multiple times and actually, getting that and thinking that intellectual appreciation and quote unquote understanding is more important or enough to be successful. I think therein lies, just like you said, is a perfect example. And people start spinning all around, and that's how you get these discussions. But more so, I see a lot of people frustrated and, why it's not working the way that they thought it was. And that's pretty much exactly why.
So, Frater, to that point, Jason Moad says, I'd love to hear Frater Ashen Chassan talk about any cosmology he's been able to put together through his experience. His work is necessarily steeped in Judeo-Christian references and imagery, but does he feel that he's working with entities that are older and were adopted by this perspective? Do the angels he communicates with have views on other pantheons, on Greek or Norse deities? And then Zach Phoenix, Frater, says that he would like to know, how has your spiritual and religious belief changed after encountering these planetary beings?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I had the same interests, the same curiosities and the questions, and they're included in Gateways Through Light and Shadow. I'm trying to remember back. It might have been with Archangel Anael or something, but I asked the question of, what about the other gods? What about the Greek gods? And these are they real? Are a connection? Or are they in some sort of conflict with the perception of you as angels under God? What about these kind of things? And it was so funny because, of course, I didn't get a direct answer. I don't have the exact quote of how they responded. It's in the book, but from what I remember, what the angel said was they're very much aware of the other gods and the other beings and even the demons. And Archangel Michael made this an earlier point from it. And there's no conflict there. There's no battle of the gods or, who's being acknowledged, who's not being acknowledged, or, who's trying to take over what. It's so funny, but it seemed perfect in the way that certain spiritual lessons come across. There's like a metaphor or analogy of something of that, we were all peaks of the same mountain range, or, something like that to that degree. And, in that lies a mystery that you're basically just going to have to deal with. So it was great. But, after meditating and learning further from them, you still get the aspect of, yes, they're there, they're veritable, they're real. Our perceptions with them, again, it's the human element. We're perceiving them, interacting with them, and appreciating them in our unique ways, which I don't think builds conflict. I actually think is quite beautiful. It's a neat experiential component. I don't see things of needing to be all unified and all uniform. It hasn't caused problems with me talking to gods and goddesses of other traditions and spiritual beings of any kind. Still have to be careful. There's a lot that are not very good for people and inviting into your life, of course, but that's a different aspect. I asked about that, and I've had, even before the experiences of the archangels, I had personal experiences with my perceptions of these ancient Celtic deities, and they were very profound, and they shifted a lot of things in my earlier life that way. So I was very aware of them. I think approaching this with humility. And I think that's probably the best way from my standpoint as a magician, especially in our modern times where so many cultures and ideas and religions are there, is to appreciate that diversity, but also try not to form it into something that we want it to. Some of these angels and some of these beings appeared to me, and when I asked them questions about religions, I got answers that I wasn't expecting or that I didn't personally believe at that time. And I think that's something to be open to, because if you're calling up things that just keep giving you answers and replies of things that you already knew and you already believed anyways, it's time to double check the reality of and the veritability of your experiences, because it might just be coming from your own head. We did the drawing spirits into crystals experiments traditionally, which is through the Christian context. It likely had something to do with the way in which these beings presented themselves to us. It very well, even though both of us were not devout, and certainly my Scryer was not, considered part of that religion at all. But when asked about questions about biblical things, about Jesus, about God, these kind of things, I asked, and the answers are the answers that we got. It came right through my Scryer, and some of them were much more traditional, religious sort of replies and images than I expected. I expected something more, I don't know, maybe modern, universal, culturally universally accepted or something. At some points they were just very, kind of direct in how powerful and how sacred these beings were, these figures, whether biblically or otherwise. But pretty much everything came back in a sense of sacredness, and that was from Jesus to other gods and goddesses to Muhammad. There's nothing slandered, I guess I should say, from the angels, regardless of what we were talking about. There's something that, you talked about it in a respectful and in a powerful manner, and that's something that I took as an important lesson for myself. So I wish I had better answers, but it's still a state of mystery for myself. I think it keeps me humble, and it keeps me respectful of other people's faiths and points, not only as just to respect them as people and everything, but these experiences are real for them too, even if they're colored differently than mine. Even if I can't perceive the same being in the fashion that they do, they're presenting themselves to a people, individuals and cultures in a very real sense, in a very important sense, and that's the beauty of divinity in expression, because it transcends humans' tendency to try to capitalize and solidify something that will not be solidified.
Frater, to that point, does that also apply to, as you mentioned, this kind of unknowability? Does that apply to the physical descriptions of spirits? So, for example, Rick Wood is asking you, in the context of full manifestation, what are Frater Ashen Chassan's thoughts on the classic images of spirits? Given that they form such interesting subject matter, why aren't there more contemporary depictions accompanying modern versions of texts?
I think I knew what he's getting at. As far as contemporary texts, both of my books have images. They're done through the illustrator. I've got my own Liber Spiritums and books of spirits that I've drawn. I'm not a fantastic artist, but I drew them from memory. And the illustrators worked with me to get the visions of my Scryer and myself as well as I could. It's how they appeared. And their appearances have been awesome. And some things I've gone very recognizable when they appear. I'm like, yeah, I know that's them. It's like somebody that's a familiar friend or, family. You recognize them. You don't have to think about it. You know who you're speaking with. But in saying that, it should be understood, and I think I've stated this several points. In no ways do I think that any spirit whatsoever looks like something or appears as anything in their natural state or in their form. That's kind of a ridiculous concept. When they are appearing to us, to a person, we're understanding them, we're perceiving them in the office that they're presenting themselves to us. When we see Archangel Michael, when he appeared to us with that, that lion kind of warrior headdress helmet thing and, the yellow, and he's looking very strong and masculine warrior. That's not about, having to like it looks a certain way, like he's off in the cosmos looking that way. We're perceiving knowledge. That is communication, and people should need to really understand that about angels. And it's, even from the biblical references. Well, why 6 wings? Why multiple heads with these animals? And sometimes very terrifying things, which they can be. They can be very disturbing, but it's not a grandiose just display because it's cool. It's communication. It's conveying symbolic and corresponding perceptions that you don't do just through words. And all of this, I've very much come to know that angels communicate multiple levels simultaneously. The room feels a certain way. There's certain kind of lights. Your emotions change to something that is definite tells of like, whoa, this kind of being is here. When I've been in the presence of negative, dangerous beings, unmistakable communication just through my gut, even before I see things, of there's this kind of being here. These are parts of communication that as magicians and people in the magical world, we should be paying attention to. These are gifts to help perceive spiritual phenomenon. Our sight is just one of those. It can be useful, but we shouldn't get fixated on the appearances as being something that's congruent to a greater truth or a solidity of them somehow, if that makes sense. They're appearing to us to convey messages as a signature, almost like their sigil of who they are and how they're being represented to us during that communication. That's what that's for. And when we draw their image along with their name and their sigil, their image is another powerful correspondence to help connect to that entity that's incorporeal. They're not physical, but it helps connect to them in a way that we can exchange and communicate with them.
One of the best quotes that I always remember from your first book, and I think this touches on this, Frater, is in Gateways Through Stone and Circle, talking about getting out of your own way, just like allowing things to unfold, of course, in the proper context of the ritual, but eliminating that clutter, eliminating all of the things that really separate you from having a successful working and really being open to receiving things, during the ritual, as opposed to forcing these kind of like artificial expectations on everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the biggest challenge, especially for modern magicians, is it's fun to think about this stuff and discuss, and I think that's important, but you don't want to bring that into the magical circle, so to speak. If this is something you're serious about and you want to have genuine experiences, you really do have to get that questioning and cycling mind. You got to get that out of the way somehow to really enjoy a genuine experience instead of thinking about the experience that you're going to have and trying to, control and formulate it all through your conscious mind. That can just totally destroy something, because most often when you're doing these things, a lot of things happen that you did not expect or that, you didn't imagine ahead of time. And I've said that over and over again, but it takes being able to put that stuff on the shelf and be willing to jump into an unknown, going, I've got this technology and, I've read and heard what other people have done and this kind of thing, but I'm about to open myself to the unknown. I don't know what to fully expect, and I'm willing to be open to whatever happens, even if it's not what I was hoping for or what I thought it would be. And I think that's the only way to really not only appreciate the power of these magical rituals, but to appreciate the spirits themselves, to, again, jump out of that comfort zone and appreciate something beyond your own head that will be something new. It'll be something different. It'll give you new insights, information, and experiences that you didn't have before.
Frater, we have a question from Lori Romano, who wants to know, what is the most disturbing thing that has ever happened to them, meaning you and your Scryer Ben, in the course of an evocation, and how did this affect workings after this? Is there anything, I know you've had incredibly consciousness expanding experiences, but is there anything you can share about one of the most or the most disturbing thing and how that's affected afterwards?
Yeah, we've had some interesting things that really shook us up. As far as our working together through the course of Gateways Through Light and Shadow, we didn't really deal with any hugely dark beings. I think the most dangerous or powerful or kind of just almost alien feeling as foreign, very foreign feeling spirits were the kings, but also the directional cardinal kings, which I'll get into again in just a bit. But the first thing that popped in my head was really our evocation of Archangel Uriel. And it was done during this blood moon eclipse and in between time that the Archangel later revealed that it kind of wanted to make it a case in point of that. Is its office, is this, time and of no time and really different kind of perceptions that really took us out of, I think, our comfort zone. And when I was asking specifically about its, the lore attributed to this archangel about being a guardian or holding the keys of Tartarus, this kind of perceived mythical or archetypical underworld or dimension where these, very powerful and ancient beings were kept basically locked away. My scryer specifically was taken to this feeling of being in this massive, I guess, like bowl and hearing these sounds. And it was just sounds. He didn't even see anything, but the sounds that emanated frightened him. And he was shaking and breathing very erratically during the evocation. And I got the sense of we were just in proximity of something that was well beyond our comprehension and comfortability, and that there's beings that existed that humanity had no idea about, and that they were so dangerous. And the concept of that danger is not just getting killed or even, your soul kind of in jeopardy. It was something beyond that was just not understandable, but it was just instinctual of like, oh my God, we stepped over, something that we could understand, and it was frightening. It was very, very frightening. The angel wasn't trying, it said later, not trying to, intimidate or frighten us, but just to give us a small taste of, this is my function. I do this, but it's way beyond, you don't want to touch that. And your curiosity goes there like, okay, I'm not going to try to touch that further. That's good enough. Even if I thought I had the courage and everything, it wouldn't help anyways, because I wouldn't be able to grasp. So those and some of the more powerful archangels, and then later with the kings, understanding that from our perspective, even from the Grimoires and our understanding of, spiritual beings. And that's where the academia really takes a sidestep, and you're dealing with actual beings that, for all your knowledge, you're not prepared for the reality that's behind them. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can't academically and intellectually, weasel your way to feel more confident and comfortable and get a grasp on that. It doesn't exist. So you have to just be humble and go, okay, I'll take the small piece of, experience and understanding that was given, and I'll try to use that as best I can. There were those points for both Ben and I that was just like, whoa. It was more feeling more than, something frightening that we saw. It was more just their presence and them kind of opening up more of their actual presence that really bordered on as much as we could handle. It was like Archangel Metatron, which in retrospect was kind of a ridiculous thing to do, a evocation to begin with. And I about lost consciousness. I about lost control of the ceremony and any perception of where I was, who I was, or what was going on. It was just a bit too much. Learned some great things, but I also learned some of my limits, and it was humbling.
To that point, Frater, we have 4 questions. JC Justice is asking, what does Frater Ashen Chassan think about the Picatrix-style elections for pentacle construction? Jacob Matthews says, to kind of further to JC Justice's suggestion, a good discussion on talisman construction would be great. In particular, Frater Chassan's views on the extent of the benefits and importance of going beyond planetary day and hour lunar mansion for talisman elections. I am interested in how far he goes down the rabbit hole, essential dignities only, or full chart. Tomislav Kalist says, I would love to also hear about Frater Chassan's experiences in electing times. Does he use full elections, or does he just observe, say, Lords of the Day and Hour, as well as moon phases? And then finally, Gustavo Vasconcelos is asking, ask Frater Ashen Chassan about how much time he spends to make some apparatus. When I spend 10 hours on a carpet, the result is pretty shitty. And Gustavo, it's okay. We are rooting for you. We know that you will do great. So take as much time, Frater. I think really going in depth here would be great.
All right. And so, yeah, definitely a big topic. It's definitely the largest piece of my magical career, especially currently, that I do for clients, making talismans and pentacles on a regular basis, most definitely, as much as I can. It's been interesting doing the work that I've been doing, seeing the experiences and the feedback that I've got from clients and people that I've sent out, and also learning more about how these were made and gaining an appreciation. I have a copy of the Pick a Tricks. I haven't read it all the way through. I flipped it, and my knowledge is pretty rudimentary. My knowledge in astrology, as a magician, is still pretty rudimentary. I have appreciation for it. It's definitely a big aspect of the whole cosmos and the magical universe, so to speak, and those things working. But in my appreciation of it, I've definitely seen it as just another correspondence, another aspect that is less determining and more functioning particular things towards particular ends, but definitely not in determining factors for how things can play out and how things can function magically. And I'll go more into depth of that. I've gained more appreciation of this listening to Dr. Stephen Skinner and how he's really talking about the very two different streams of magic that I've come across as far as talismans and amulets and stuff have come from like the Arabic source, which is imagery magic and overall highly and solely dependent on very, very specific and exact timing aspects, conjunctions, and so on and so forth in order to get something doing its proper effect when it's made. And the other school being definitely where I'm coming from, which is the kind of Solomonic magic dealing directly with spirits in order to get things effectually done and produced with results. And what I've noticed is that I've seen other people they're proficient and they're professionals in the imagery magic and talismanic making, and I definitely have appreciation for it. I haven't seen or witnessed personally amazing and continual success and results that way. I may have come across one or two situations or things that I've read about where it has, but that's about it. My own experience is the spirit, first and foremost, is the moving power behind a talisman. That's the way that I make them. I'll choose a proper day and hour, and I usually try to make them specifically when the moon is increasing. But beyond that, I don't pay particular mind so much to other astrological considerations. Sometimes in the key of Solomon, if it suggests specific things or that things be within certain signs, I'll do that. But I found that not only that these things are just correspondences, the metal themselves. So if you're picking gold for the sun, copper for Venus, silver for the moon, whatever it is, that's one aspect that's trying to get a stronger link to the particular office of the spirits that are in charge of the corresponding effects that you're trying to get. The engraved sigils and names and letters and shapes are also a component, an aspect, a consideration, and correspondent to those same ideals, the corresponding office. The timing in the day is another one of those. So you're layering. I've talked about layering quite a bit, and it's you're boosting up your percentage of power and success rate by matching these things, yes. But overall, once that comes down, once it's made, it's still a piece of metal. And that's why you can get, these talismans and pentacles from novelty shops and people that, print them out and everything. But they're jewelry. They don't do anything. I haven't heard or personally seen or experienced them having an effect for people one way or another ever. And I've had a lot of people that have tried to make these things work, and they're like, well, I haven't had any success with this. But I find when I make these talismans and I do my specific ritual of contacting these beings that I've become very familiar for, and I ask them, will you bless us? Will you endow this physical piece of property with your office so that it functions according to what it says here? You get a reply, yes, but these things have to be met, or yes, I'll do this and it'll function as long as this person has it with them. Or sometimes I get, it's going to function under these specific circumstances. Sometimes they'll have different lessons at different times, or maybe considering who I'm making them for. But a lot of times it's pretty much across the board of they agree to endow this piece of physical property with their office, and then it becomes a talisman. Then it becomes a magical article. Then it's consecrated. It is consecrated by them. It's amazing how when sending those out, I receive these messages like, oh my God, like things started happening even before it came in my hand, and then when I got it in my hand, this started happening. And I'm still amazed. I'm still impressed by the work, and I don't accredit that to myself because I'm not making it magical. It's the spirits that are making them magical and causing these effects, and it's impressive. It's impressive from my standpoint because, I can follow directions and listen to what they say, but the effects that they have are out of my hands, so to speak. I'm just kind of following the steps and asking them that this object, this piece of jewelry, do something for somebody that is indeed quite magical. And I really appreciate that process. So to kind of answer those questions before, that is my experience and that is my process. I'm not a good astrologer. I'm not somebody completely familiar with all the mansions in the moon and all the different imagery magic requirements and specifics and calculations that are needed for that area of working. I'm definitely a novice that way. I rely wholly and entirely on the spirits to effectuate any change. And I'm glad that they do. And I'm always amazed when things happen, but it's not on my efforts of, doing these amazing calculations. As far as the other articles of, and things that I make magically, and I've spoken about this a little bit before, but it's funny because I don't have formal training. I think the only thing I said is that I had shop class when I was in junior high or something like that. But I've always liked making things just as a hobby and things that I've been drawn to. There's artisans much more talented than I am by far, and a lot better crafters, and everybody has been extremely generous with their praise, and I definitely appreciate it. But maybe in some sense they do tell that, like when I make something magical, I make a wand, I make a talisman. To me, it's not just an artistic piece. It's not something solely for the sake of beauty. It's something for sacred functionality. A magical purpose when I'm making something that I know or really hope is intended for magical use. That is something that has my full attention and something that, for lack of a better phrase, comes from my heart. And I make it to the best of my ability in the due times. And again, it's another way for me to stay present. It's a magical working that, again, I think is lost on a lot of people because they're worried about their craftsmanship or the time and money and energy considered in making some of these things. But for me, it's a huge aspect of the magical formula that Archangel Raphael has spoken to directly about. My even having successes and drawing spirits into crystals was due into the dedication and the kind of, I guess, intention that I put into making those things, because they're not just things, they're not just props to me, they're instruments of sacred experiential change through magical change. So those things, they're not to be, I don't want to put them in a place where you're valuing like things above people or that way, but it's something that you understand they're representative of the sacred things that you are doing that should come from the deepest place of yourself, considering they may be some of the more important experiences of your personal journey through life. So there's something that should be considered that way. So that is just kind of always my mindset when I make these things. They have imperfections, and like I said, artisans are much more talented than I am, but I craft them with that mindset, and I think people have come to appreciate that, which makes me happy. They can seem to understand that at some level.
To that point, Matthew Kolesieski, I apologize, Matthew, about pronunciation, mentions that your work is phenomenal, and that kind of goes into what you just touched on, because he was asking about how you got into making magical implements and tools. But Matt has another question about, outside of ivory or ebony for the pedestal, is there any other material that Frater Chassan could recommend? I understand the importance of sticking to the text, but he's curious about correspondences and why this particular text used such unusual items compared to the hazel or elder found in most others. So that's a pedestal question from Matthew, Frater.
Yeah, for sure. And to be quite honest and to point, I don't know the exact source, reasoning, or way that, that ebony or ivory was or is suggested for the pedestal as far as, found in the Magus and drawing spirits into crystals. Even for the wand, ebony is very unique for that as far as I know. It's not really mentioned as used wand in other sources to my knowledge. These are mysteries and questions that I receive all the time continuously. Like, well, it says this, but can I use this? And my answer is always the same. Like, I don't know. I haven't used that. My suggestion is, like, if you're working from, drawing spirits into crystals, then use what it says. Try that first. And I know it's difficult and the materials are not easy to come by, not easy to work with. Ebony is very dense and difficult wood to carve and work with anyways, but you do it or you don't do it. And again, I think it's more of a question of, you start getting mentally overloaded and looking for substitutions or, this text is this text is this, can I do this to do that? And, if you keep going down that road, it disseminates into infinite nothingness. I mean, it's pretty much, do whatever you want and, see how it goes. There's a leap between one or the other, but you just have to really decide what it is you want to do. We have some great texts that, came out recently when Dr. Skinner, where you can see the technology and the workings almost identical bit by bit from drawing spirits into crystal, and it has other scrying apparatuses that is another pedestal. They look like a monstrance or a relictrium, if I'm saying that correctly. There's definitely some inspiration, if not direct crossover, of that becoming the scrying apparatus. And I think those are made from gold and other materials specifically. And my suggestion would be if the ebony or ivory pedestal doesn't, if it's just not coming together or difficult to come by, work from that system. It's close enough. It's got your candles and your incense and pretty much same direct invocation and method of working. They're side by side and you could do both. So I would kind of do that if it seems like it's a little bit easier to come by, even though the pedestals and the scrying apparatuses themselves look even more complex in the other grimoires than in drawing spirits into crystals. And saying that, as an academic in science, I'm not sure. There's nothing I could pinpoint or reveal that would make that easier, but my philosophy and my recommendations still remains consistent about, just even if it's difficult, choose something and really try to tackle that as best you can and don't deviate, because then you'll be, scrounging around trying to piece things from who knows what every time a hurdle comes up, and it's just a horrible way to approach a magical procedure, in my opinion.
Raimondo Bucase is asking, I'd like to know Frater Chassan's opinion on, speaking of equipment, using the circle from the Goetia of the Lemegeton as a standard circle for all the experiments in the Lemegeton in general, and specifically for the Almandel. What circle, if any, does Frater Chassan use, or would he recommend using for Almandel work? And I know that you've had a lot of experience with the Almandel.
Yeah, so case in point for the Almandel, I did use a circle, but I didn't use my goetic circle because I didn't have enough room. It was in my first house where I had my magical working room, but it was considerably smaller than the one I have now. I think it was one of my 7-foot circles that I put, and with the Almandel, it's kind of a tarp or a tent that you put over the circle that has matching colors for whatever Almandel that you're working with, whatever direction. To be more specific, if you have the space, then the goetic circle that has all of the planetary aspects and the scale of 10, in there. I mean, it works perfect, and it suggests that you use the furniture from one book or one art to the next. And I don't have any doubt that it would be effective for that. But for the Almandel specifically, if you have the room, you would set up the 9-foot circle. You would set up the canopy over that, and there's kind of a famous illustration that many magicians are familiar with. I can't remember the exact source, but it shows it's kind of an oratory, and there's a magician kind of praying inside the oratory to an angel, and he's inside a magic circle, and the tent is on the circle, and there's demons and stuff trying to distract him or whatever on the outside of the circle. But case in point, that's the idea behind the Almandel, and that's how I set mine up. I suspended a large hoop that I put the proper colored sheets up and around to kind of encase me in the color associated with the almadel, and the skirt of the tent basically went to the inside rim. I guess you could go to the outside rim as well, but it went to the inside rim of my magical circle and enveloped me almost, not quite 360 degrees. It had, I want to say, like a 3 to 4 foot opening in the front. But the table, which I used, is actually the same table that I used for the Ars Paulina, the Paulina arts, as well as the Thurgia Goetia. It's the same table, but it would be covered with a cloth, usually a linen cloth with the same color of the attributed tablet and the angels. I would have basically a board or a card of the appropriate color that I would set the incense burner on in the center. And then the almadel would go on top of that. So my almadel setup was like that. And there's photos of that, but that's inside the circle. Everything is there that you need with you inside the circle when you do the invocation and such. But I never had the sword. It's been a while now, but I don't even think I had my wand with me in there. It was pretty simple. I had my incense and my invocations, and of course the tablet and lighting source. And also, it's good to have like a chafing dish or something where you can light the charcoals and not, get it all over the almadel or burn holes on your linen on your altar. And there's those kind of considerations where you can, get the fire going and then put it in your clay dish that matches the color underneath the almadel. You're pretty much all set. So hopefully that helps out. But yeah, you can definitely use the same materials and furnitures for those books of the Lemegeton.
That really helps. And to that point, Kiss a Kiss has a question, 2 questions actually for you. Why did Frater Ashen Chassan begin with the Trithemius book, Drawing Spirits into Crystals for Practicing? And what was your eventual goal when you initially started out? And I know that you wrote a ton about this in Gateways Through Stone and Circle, but maybe just for listeners who have not read that. And then another question that I think is at the very end of your book, which Kiss a Kiss is asking, how long did it take for Frater Chassan until you got your first successful spirit manifestation, or did it happen just right from the beginning? And I know you've written extensively on your engagement with Cassiel in your first book.
Yeah, so just to recap, I'll give my shout out to the old red wizard, Frater Rufus Opus, gentleman. So yeah, this hails back to some very earlier workings, and I gave him a lot of credit for drawing my attention to drawing spirits into crystals, and also his take and work on it, basically communicating with him and only a few other magicians at the time, and still people who I kind of have in high esteem and consider kind of my magical colleagues, even though we have different ways of working. There are people that I've come to respect and communicate with and appreciate their working and outlook on stuff through the years. But I want to say that this was earlier in our Gentlemen of Jupiter group that we had going on, and it was a method of contacting these planetary angels. And I had the Magus and I had read through it before, but I had become inspired to really tackle this through Rufus Opus, and he was kind of doing it in a different way, in a modified form. And of course, me being who I am, I was like, well, I'm going to do it the traditional way. I want to see if I can do it exactly as it said and see what I get and the results that I get. So that's what I did. I set to work making the materials, and I started taking pretty copious notes about how I was doing this. This is how I made this. This is how I did this. That eventually became the structure and the bones to my first book, well before I considered writing, publishing anything. And that's how it started out. It was just kind of a manuscript that I was going to follow the procedure, make my notes, and share them with my magical colleagues if I got anything of it. The first archangel that I attempted to contact was Archangel Cassiel Saturn. I was lucky because during the first evocation, I got an experience. I got his image, and I got some pretty profound results. But again, for listeners, I had to tell you, this was after I'd already had 2 years prior of continual weekly evocation and success of appearance and auditory communication with the angels of the Almadel. So scrying and doing magical Solomonic technology procedures I wasn't starting fresh in that regard. I was just starting fresh with this particular system of drawing spirits into crystals. I share that kind of very first initial result and what happened in the back of my very first book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle. And also for anybody who might be unfamiliar, the certain symbols and things that were shown to me that I saw that I didn't quite understand are later revealed and expounded upon when I finally contacted the Archangel, I want to say like a third time or so, with my Scryer and asked him about the things that he initially showed me. And it was really neat to see how prophetic and how dynamic those experiences and those symbols that he showed me were, because they proved to be very impactful and meaningful symbols that were going on at that time and continually going on now. So it's kind of neat that way to see that kind of communication extend those many years. It's been my primary technology and method of especially angelic contact. And that's just specifically because I've done it so many times, and it's really become integral to my skill set as a practicing magician, and it's given me the best continual results and over time. And it's one of the least complex systems of evocation as far as Solomonic evocation that I've come across still. It's just really become kind of the backbone of my working, the best way of contacting these beings that I've experienced thus far.
Absolutely. And Raimondo Bueques actually asked a question I think that flows pretty well from what you just said, which is, what is Frater Chassan's opinion on the class of spirit one should work with for real-world practical results? For example, chthonic versus celestial for things like finding treasure or causing storms.
Yeah, I think part of being a Solomonic magician or somebody that converses with spirits, it's something important to know. Angelic beings can cause effects, but they are definitely different than the chthonic or spirits of other classes or categories, for sure. I've really noticed that the angels and the angelic beings, they have a much wider, I guess, appreciation or spectrum or results of workings for things that you asked for. It's not that they can't. I mean, you definitely can enact and manifest practical situations in your life, but you'll find that it happens in a much more, for lack of a better word that's coming to mind, holistic kind of way. And you have to be kind of patient and appreciate the factions of working, because it usually involves you having to undergo some sort of change or alteration in how you're appreciating whatever it is you want or want from somebody else, moving things around that way in order for circumstances to line up where these things happen in a more, again, holistic way. And that's a very broad way to paint that, where in some of the goetic beings and other chthonic beings and elementals and such that I've worked with will take different approaches to kind of bring into your reality, your attention, and your environment what it is that you want. Hopefully, if you're communicating it correctly, if you're asking for it correctly, which depends on the skill, understanding, perceptions of the magician. You have to be able to do that correctly. Otherwise, things will go wonky sometimes. And that's part of the trial and error of this art form. They can bring in more practical things like affection and wealth and money and protection, and depending, as long as you're contacting the correct being for its office and making sure that communication is clear, it'll happen in kind of a more direct way. But often, even when it comes and everything, there's going to be accompanying variables and things that follow your methods of basically manipulating and moving things around, and that you'll see. And I'll just give the example that sprung to my mind. So again, in my book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow, we were having bad fires and really severe weather that it felt like, as a magician, it was part of my responsibility to see if I could do something about it. And I did. But, I contacted these water elementals and the water kings and, asked them to do that. And they even gave a warning that, like, hey, with our power, I know it seems intense in your area right now, but this is going to be like dumping a lake on a campfire. And it kind of sunk in, but I was like, well, I got to do something about it anyways. And I understand that, but got to do something. So I was like, okay, I just kind of swallowed, I guess, the decision to go through with it. And it put the fires out, but then we had floods and it washed. I mean, we had severe floods that caused maybe even more damage. And, I got that, and I wasn't able to kind of bring the correct moderation of elements together. It happened that way, but it got the direct results and things going where it might have been different just going through an angel perchance. But just another case in point of magic is nothing comes from nothing. The reality of magic is that if you're going to manipulate and make causalities in the world, it's going to come from somewhere. The fantasy of magic is that you manifest something out of quote unquote thin air or nothingness, and that doesn't happen. Whatever you choose to move or do on any level, it's pulling from something, it's taking from something, it's changing from something else in order to bring it into effect of what you want. If you don't have a clear vision of what that could look like or how that's going to pan out, it could cause problems. It could cause some situations that you didn't intentionally want to go that way. So it can be a delicate science.
Frater Matt is asking, what is a typical day in the life of a ceremonial magician? What daily rituals does Frater Ashen Chassan do? Does he get up every day at 4 a.m.? So, as you mentioned, Frater, it's important to break out of habits when it comes to negative habits. But in terms of positive consistency, is there anything you can share about kind of the typical day in the life, so to speak?
Sure. Well, I'll try not to give away all my secrets, but the things I will share, I get up pretty early anyways, but not very much magically. That's just because I have to be early to work at my job, and I have some pretty full days in the midst of the week. But the nice thing is it can open up time for other parts of the week. Consistently, what I do is morning and everything, I will have some prayers and such that I do as I start my day. And even in the shower, I think I've gotten into the habit of saying certain things just through the many ritual showers that I've done, just to set a better intention and sense of mental cleanliness for the day as I start my workday, regardless of what I'm doing. But every evening, I come down to my magical chamber. My wife usually accompanies me as well, and we do prayer. So we sit in front of, I have a central altar that I have that's dedicated to my highest ideal of divinity and the Creator, and I offer prayers. And my prayers typically consist of just not asking for things, but of thanks of everything that I've got. I've found that gratitude is important for me. I don't think angels or the Creator or anything require gratitude on any stretch of the level, but I think that I do. And I think it's important for me to remember just in my own little space of, for everything that I've done, I've been able to achieve and that I've seen, it hasn't been because I deserve it. And it's not, trying to sound all humble and everything, but it's the truth. I mean, I am not spiritual guru. There's masterful people that are light years beyond me as far as spiritual discipline and walking the path and, being these amazing masters and examples. But I don't consider myself near to one of those, but I'm still appreciative of the experiences and the things that I've been allowed to do and that I continue to do. So I try to make it a habit of doing that. And that's something that's personally meaningful for me. And like I say again, I don't think on the spirit side, any spirits like they need that, or I don't know if they enjoy that at all. It doesn't really matter. My wife and I will do that, and sometimes we will bring people into our thoughts. Oftentimes we bring people in our thoughts. We do healings and other workings for people, even outside of the client work that I do that's brought up. And then I'll sit down and I'll go into Hiram's little room and I'll sit down in front of him, and my wife is usually there too. And if I have specific questions, of course I'll do that. And, sometimes Hiram has some messages for me like, hey, stop screwing around so much, or, doing this, and, pay attention to these workings, or, that. So it's nice because I have a coach, and, besides my wife, I have somebody that can kind of stay on my case to make sure I'm not messing around too bad, because I have a tendency to still do that. It kind of keeps me on track. And so that'll be kind of my ritual evening that we do every night before we go to bed. I'll do that. But there's many things in between that, of course, because I'm usually working on, projects. I'm looking at my dates and, when can I make this for this client? When can I do this avocation for this client? And, we have that. So I'm often trying to juggle my schedule around to figure out when I can do things, and that's ongoing. So it's, even though it varies up, it's pretty continual because I'm usually doing workings in some fashion or another. It's ongoing.
And to that point, Frater, Adley Nichols is asking, Frater Chassan, how is the regalia, such as the vestments, the pentacles, the hexagrams, and tools, divided between yourself and Ben McStefan, your scryer? Who holds what weapons, he says? What does the scryer wear for protection if the operator has the pentacle and the hexagram, etc.? So how does that get divided up in terms of the phylactery and the spirit sigil and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I think if we were doing a full-on goetic working, which I still have the plans for it, it may be different. For drawing spirits into crystals, it's pretty simple. My scryer wears linen alb, which I have many, and he does that, and he'll wear the lamen of the spirit, which has its sigil and everything on there that I've divvied up between it being made of parchment and then being made of its associated metal. And through experiential results, to be honest, I don't know of a noticeable difference between the effectiveness or basically how much there's a change between the whole operation between the material of the lamen itself. So there is that, but because we've experimented with both and they both seem to function as well as can be expected. And that's pretty much all he has is he's wearing his alb and he sits on the chair in front of the pedestal and the scrying apparatus. You know, he starts to get himself in the state. He'll look at the lamen. He'll kind of stare at it for a while. After we started getting into our practices, we both were able to jump into our roles expertly. We just do through experience. We knew exactly what each was doing, and I don't think I even told him. He was really able to pick it up, and I think through a lot of intuition, just know what to do. And he would sit there and he would gaze at the lamen for a while and the sigil and kind of make a rapport. And it was usually the first time he'd ever see it during our experiments, and he would look at it for a while, and then he would start doing some breathing exercises and getting himself into, his state of mind. And I would be doing the opening ceremonies and the consecration of the circle and the candles and, this sort of thing. But I would also do a blessing upon him as well and anoint his forehead with oil. That was an extra thing that is not directly in drawing spirits into crystal, but something that I adopted a bit from the Goetia and everything as an added blessing for him during his experiment, which goes beyond the regalia. I understand, kind of getting into other elements. But that was all. He wouldn't have a wand or anything like that. He would just be looking. In other grimoires, like the Key of Solomon and other ones, like the other disciples and people have a sword or, things like that. I don't know. I'd probably, if I was doing that specific experiment, I would, give that a test. But I haven't done things with other people that have a whole bunch of things. I'm usually the only one that has a wand or a sword or the book or whatever.
I don't think we talked about that specific detail in the last podcast when Ben was on, but I think that just kind of gives people a really, really good picture of how things work. Well, Frater, I cannot thank you enough for answering all these amazing listener questions. But of course, I would love to talk about something is coming up this June, Frater Ashen Chassan, a very cool workshop that you have, and I'd love to just talk about that. Can you share with the listeners, Frater, a little bit about when this workshop is, what city is it going to be in, and what are some of the things that, people can expect to have with this really cool event coming up?
Yeah, definitely. So I am putting on another Skills of the Ceremonial Magician workshop. It's a workshop that I did earlier in Britain, in the UK, last October, and had a blast with it. It seemed to be a success. The feedback that I got from it was amazing, and also the people that were in the class were just excellent magical people. I really did put them to work. It's not just me standing up for 3 days and talking about magic. There's very little of that, and we're actually doing magic. And I had them doing experiment after experiment quite exhaustively, and they did phenomenal. The whole workshop is pretty 3 intensive days. It is a workshop where, we're talking a little bit about what we're doing, what it is to actually begin and do ceremonial magic. I really liked it because I had some people that were very accomplished and experienced in ceremonial magic, and then some people who are brand new. Everyone said that they got something out of it to either highly refine their workings or establish some things that in connections that they hadn't had before, or it really gave them a basis of really working and practicing magic, where before it was an interest in intellectual passion, but they just didn't feel like they had the grounds to really leap off and start practicing. But after the workshop, they did. So yes, June 17th and 9th, as long as I'm not forgetting my dates, but it should be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It will be in Colorado Springs. So people will be flying into my hometown to the mountains to come to my place where I'm usually traveling out to other places to share these gifts and these experiences that I have. They're able to come and see me. Articles and some magical things that I'm making specifically for the students will be part of the package. They will be learning how to practice regardless of their interest or appreciation for tradition. I'm presenting it in 3 different forms. That is the idea that specifically these ceremonial magical workings come from either a liturgical background, so very much kind of religious for acting in the role of the priest, using those kind of methods and rituals and practices that are familiar to the priesthood. And what you find in the Grimoires is one of them. More modernly, there's the lodge approach to ceremonial magic, which is definitely effectual, is something from the Golden Dawn onward being well established and workable, and something that I'm familiar with. And there's also the folk, basically just practical and approach to ceremonial magic that way that still has its rituals and a lot of the crossover and the cunning man things. But through those 3 ideals, finding out how to do the basics of, well, how do I do ceremonial magic from those 3 different approaches or appreciations? We go through that and establishing from the ground up, well, what if you want to make a wand, if you want to make something magical, how do you make a magical instrument regardless of your aptitude for craftsmanship? The answer being consecration. And well, how do we consecrate? And I go through all that. And again, I don't talk about it. I have people consecrate various things and magical implements right then and there. And from that standpoint, learning how to call up certain powers, establish places of protection, of making places sacred, being able to contact these powerful elemental beings and make connections that way. And we actually do Scryer and operator practices and exercises that were just awesome in the UK, and I have no doubt will be amazing here in my home state.
Frater, is there anything else that we did not cover that you wanted just to touch on, or are there any other reminders or any other information that you want to share with listeners about where they can reach you? I guess I should say this really quick. I know there's a Facebook page with implements and other things that you are also making.
I've got my workshop, or I should say semi-shop, up on Facebook where people, if they're interested in purchasing some magical talismans or implements that I make, they can browse through there and see some things. I'm going to be putting up a lot more things soon, hopefully over the weekend, if I can get everything in gear and post up some more pictures. There's that. Definitely the main Facebook page is a great way to reach me. I seem to do most of my communication and exchange through there. I badly need to update my blog, which has been neglected a lot. I hardly ever get on there, but pretty much through Facebook and through the store is a great way to reach me if you're interested. But yeah, those are the primary ways to get in contact with me, is through there.
Frater Ashen Chassan, thank you so much as always for taking the time truly and coming back on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's been a pleasure.
It is always such an honor to have Frater Ashen Chassan on the podcast, and thanks as always goes directly to you, the listeners, for always kicking butt and taking the time to enjoy Glitch Bottle. In the meantime, you can always subscribe and check out previous episodes and other magical Glitch Bottle news on YouTube, youtube.com/glitchbottle, and you can download and listen to podcast episodes on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker.com, and Stitcher Radio. You can subscribe on YouTube, and if you do, make sure to hit that little notification bell for new episodes as soon as they post. And you can always follow us on Twitter as well, at GlitchBottle. Our intro music is the track Tornado by David Zeste. Our magical interest is fueled by sincerity, passion, amazing guests, and a copious amount of clinking coffee cups. Until next time, this is Alexander F. reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.